Tvameva Vedyagravidam Tvameva Sarvam Mama Deva Deva Tvameva Sarvam Mama Deva Deva. Jai Guru. Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahana Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. So we are forging ahead in our 6th chapter, the Yoga of Meditation, where we are getting very clear, specific instruction. And last week we finished up with this idea that what we are to do is absorb the mind into the inquiry, into the self, withdrawing our attention from what we call the upadhis, the equipment. I'm not the body, I'm not the prana, I'm not the feelings, I'm not the thoughts. In the space between your thoughts, with the attention introverted, see if you can notice who or what sees the thoughts and the space between our thoughts. And what we find is there's no thing there. It's vast and empty, like a shoreless ocean. Yoga Vasishtha uses my favorite expression, Chid Akash, the space of consciousness itself. Yet it shines as pure awareness, pure being, the eternal subject, I. All right, what verse are we on? And let's proceed.
Hi, Jim, we're on verse 20, and it's 4 verses back to back.
That's right, we just started them and we'll review them. Okay, because we didn't discuss them. One more time.
So, we present. Yatro paramate chittam niruddham yoga sevaya yatra chaivatmanatmanam pashyanatmani tushyati sukhamatyantikam yatta dabuddhigrayamatindriyam veti yatra na chaivayam sitaschalati tatvatah yam labdhva chaparam labham manyatenadhikam tatah yasmin stho na dukkhena gurunapi vichalyate tam vidyad dukha samyoga viyogam yoga samyitam samanishchayena yoktavyo yogo nirvinna chetasa. In the English for all 4 together is when the mind, restrained by the practice of yoga, attains quietude, and when seeing the self by the self, he is satisfied in his own self. When he, the yogi, feels that infinite bliss, which can be grasped by the pure intellect and which transcends the senses, wherein established he never moves from the reality, which having obtained, he thinks there is no other gain superior to it, wherein established he is not moved even by heavy sorrow. Let it be known, the severance from the union with pain is yoga. This yoga should be practiced with determination and with a mind steady and undespairing.
So this is very rich and very dense. So we're going to move through these 4 verses idea by idea. So Deepa, would you start back at the top and read in the English the first idea?
Sure. When the mind, restrained by the practice of yoga, attains quietude, and when seeing the self by the self.
Okay, that's far enough.
Okay.
So first, we have to restrain the mind. The second sutra of the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, Yogas Chitta Vritti Nirodha, very famous. Yoga is the restraining of the mind stuff from forming vrittis, whirlpool-like configurations. Same idea. So through bringing the mind to a single point, so we can begin to see the space between our thoughts. Then, here is this marvelous idea. What is it? Who is it who knows the self? And the way to get at the meaning of this is the meditation we do on what's called the triputi, the triple factor. So everything in the phenomenal world is known with a triple factor. There's knower, knowing, and known. For example, I, Jim, through seeing, cognize the table. I, Jim, through hearing, cognize the sound of the traffic. And I can go through all the 5 outer senses. I, through manas, the mind, cognize feelings and judgments. I, through buddhi, intellect, cognize thought. Triple factor, triple factor, triple factor. Are you you? How do you know that you are you? Do you see, hear, taste, touch, smell, feel, or think yourself? No. Oh, therefore you must not exist. No, I exist. I'm me. How do you know it? And we find that I is the knower. I is its own means of knowledge. It doesn't need an instrument. And that which is known, never as an object, yet it is known, is me. So the scriptures use phrases like swayambhu, self-evident, swayamjyoti, self-effulgent or self-shining. Listen very carefully. This is the perfect knowledge. This is the eternal knowledge. And the great cosmic joke is you've always had it. When have you ever not been you? The body changes, the prana changes, the mind changes, the intellect changes, deep sleep comes and goes. Whatever mind state you're in, whatever time, past, present, or future, whether it's waking, dream, deep sleep, always what the common factor is, the irrefutable factor, is me. I am there to know it all. So the instrument for knowing the self is the self itself. Well, if everybody already has that, then what's self-realization? What's liberation? What's enlightenment? Aha! Very good question. So, both bondage and liberation occur to the mind, actually, technically to the Vijnanamaya kosha, the subtlest part of the intellect. The self is ever free. What is bondage? There is no other bondage than the deeply rooted conviction. It's almost like hypnotism. That I am bound, meaning I think I'm my body, or my body plus the personality. The cause of that is my spiritual ignorance. There is no other liberation than the deeply rooted conviction in the subtle intellect that I'm free. How do I get it? Oh, I believe in it. I've read the scriptures. No, that's indirect knowledge. You have to have direct knowledge of it. How does this happen? Listen very carefully, because this is subtle. This subtle intellect has the capacity to reflect, to think about, to have insight into our direct experience. I'll give you a couple of examples that I like to use. With your hands, rub your hands together. Now, the instrument for hand rubbing is hands. Now we're going to do a second process called reflection. When you rubbed your hands together, was it motion or stasis? It was motion. Was it warm or cold? Oh, it created heat, warm. This function, this practice, is reflecting on the direct experience. Put your hands in your lap. With your intellect, can you rub your hands together? No. And rubbing hands together, direct sensation, that's not the same as reflecting on it. Another experience. Bring your attention to the sensation of the waistband of your trousers. Can you feel that? Now, you've probably had that sensation on your skin, on your waist, since this morning when you put your pants on. What did we just do? We brought the attentive faculty to that direct experience. Now, the direct experience of the self you always have. When are you ever not you? But because the attentive faculty is usually extroverted, I've never bothered to inquire, to investigate. What is that direct experience? Here's another example. So I think you guys can see it. Do you see behind me? There's a photograph of my teacher, Swamiji. See, it has a wooden frame, a brown wooden frame. And then inside of that is a white mat. And then you see the photograph of Swamiji with his 70s glasses. Now, if you look very carefully, because it's faded over the years, you can see that he signed it for me. You can see his signature. Can you see it? I think it's down in the left-hand side a little bit. Can you see it? Maybe difficult through the Zoom camera. Can you guys all still hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Yes. So it's always been there, but you probably have never bothered to inquire, to notice, oh, Swamiji's signature is on that photograph. Likewise, the self is always there. But because I've not brought the subtle intellect into quiescence and introverted the attentive faculty, so I can notice, well, what is myself really like? All we really need to do is withdraw our attention from the knowable to discern the nature of the knower, as Swamiji used to say. Then in the subtle intellect, there's this flash of insight. Oh, there's nobody there. There's nobody there. Now, it didn't create the self, you didn't achieve the self, you didn't become the self, but you realize, I thought I was a person, I thought I was my body, but no, I'm that space of pure awareness. So there's two kinds of knowledge here. The first is the perfect knowledge, the only real knowledge, which is the self-evidence of I. Then there's the insight, the recognition that happens in the subtle intellect. Technical term is pratyabhinyanam, recognition. It's the aha. Now, you may just get flashes of it in the beginning. If you do, the good news is you finally now have something real with which to work. If you cannot get the mind to slow down enough to sense, to intuit, no thingness, no blame, just do more tapas, do more sadhana, keep purifying your equipment. Now, just having a glimpse of it is not enough. We want to be sthita prajna, steady wisdom, meaning I'm rooted in that knowledge all the time. So just as the ordinary person with reference to her body doesn't have to run to the mirror to make sure that she's not a goat or a cow or a horse or a pig, but you know you have a human body. It's effortless knowledge. So also for the woman of wisdom or the man of wisdom. When he thinks of himself, he never confuses it with the body or the mind or the intellect. There's no story about self. It's very clear and very obvious. I'm the eternal Sakshi, the witness. All right, next idea. Deepa?
Yeah. I think you explained until the part when seeing the self by the self, right?
Yes.
Okay. He is satisfied in his own self.
Yes. So, what Gita is referring to here is the state that we call Atma Ramana. The root Ram, Ramati, means to revel. So Ramana Maharshi is he who revels. the god Rama is to revel. So we have to understand again our pleasure principle. When the mind is under the throes of what we call Vikshepa Shakti, the projecting power of the mind, when I'm restless, irritable, discontent, I want it this way, I don't want it that way, only takes two forms. I either want to change the world or I want to change me. And then I have kartavya. I've got to struggle toward that goal. That condition sucks. It's called dukkha, suffering. Its cause is kama, craving, vancha, wanting, spriha, longing. The foolish person says, let me fix that mind state. Let me drink at it. Let me drug at it. Let me gamble at it. Let me eat at it. Let me get money at it. Let me find a husband or a wife or a house or a job or something to somehow fix that feeling of being restless, irritable, and discontent. Dukkha, suffering. What actually happens when I get the object of desire, for a moment, the longing is gone, and I get a taste of the mind to some degree coming home to the self. Now, when I dance with the object, that feeling, the technical term is the Anandamaya Kosha, will vary in intensity and it will vary in duration depending on how badly I wanted the object and how fully it satisfies my desire. But the reality is, it's not in the object. I've just used the object to momentarily stop that Vikshepa Shakti, that projecting power. That's all I've done. So once the yogi figures this out, she begins to let go of this compulsive attachment to the world, this addictive relationship to the phenomenal. And then easily the mind comes home. And in the beginning, in meditation, I taste the bliss of my own self-nature. And it is the mind that has that taste. Brahmananda rasa, the juice, the taste. Atmaramana, reveling in the self. Now, there's no end to how deeply the mind can revel in the self. It's fabulous. It's just fabulous. And when you get the taste of that, it overcomes the world because it's clean. It's an immediate experience. It's not dependent on any external phenomenon. Then the mind starts to yearn for that union experience. This is the deep meaning of the word yoga. Yoga comes from the root yuj, to join. What is it that joins with what? It's the mind that is yoked to the self. That is yoga. Comes home. Shankara uses language like the person is not only a full knower of the Supreme, but who has retired into the Supreme. Is no longer afflicted by desire. Here, Krishna is echoing what he said in chapter 2, verse 55. Verse 54, Arjuna says, what are the marks of the person of steady wisdom? First thing that Krishna says, this is everything else just explaining. When a person casts off all the desires of the mind, they're gone. And is satisfied in the self by the self. Then they're said to be a person of steady wisdom. All right, next idea.
When he, the yogi, feels that infinite bliss, which can be grasped by the pure intellect and which transcends the senses.
All right, so what is it that feels blissful? In the beginning, I used to have a lot of problem with this term ananda, because the scriptures use 3 words to describe the self. Sat, Chit, Ananda, pure existence. Sat, pure awareness. Chit, bliss absolute. Ananda. Does that mean that you're just all the time? Well, actually, it's subtler than that. In the beginning, I encourage people to translate Ananda as no sorrow reaches there. Physical pain and discomfort gets as far as my body. Suffering and being upset gets as far as my mind. Doubt and confusion gets as far as my intellect. But none of it touches me. Well, why do we call it Ananda? Because the self is the fountainhead, the source of what is blissful. So when the mind can come home to the self, letting go of the phenomena, we get the taste. How do I know the self is bliss? Well, we get an indirect taste of it every time we go to sleep. Everybody loves a deep sleep. And that wonderful state in the morning when you wake up, I call it snooze alarm samadhi. Vasananda. Yeah. Vasananda. Vasanananda. Vasana ananda. So just the very, very enough mind there to go, oh, that feels so good. What's happened? You're blissful. because your mind doesn't want anything. Your mind isn't extroverting. And you're lying in bed, you go, oh, I've got to get up and go to work. Oh, I have to deal with so-and-so, or I had an argument with them. Oh, what am I going to do about that problem? And all of a sudden that bliss fades as that feeling of being restless, irritable, and discontent returns. But that deep sleep and that state in the early morning proves to us that I don't need objects to be supremely blissful. You must have an extroverting mind in order to suffer. You do not need the mind in order to be blissful. Next idea.
Wherein established in that state, wherein established, he never moves from the reality.
Yes. So once you get established in that state, when it's not just temporary, where you come in and out of it, a yo-yo going up and down, when you have steady wisdom, then there is no longer any practice to be done. The sadhana has ended. Effortlessly, all the time, you know, Aham Brahmasmi, I am that Brahman. Never again think you're a person. You're stuck there. How do I know that vasana is still operative and I need to do more tapas? If I think I'm a person, I'm deluded. That's the watchword. As long as I have moments when I think I'm a person, then I have work to do. Next idea.
This is the next verse, Jim.
All right.
So,
any questions about this one before we go on? What Krishna has done is indicate what happens as the yogi moves into what we call samadhi. And what's tasted in samadhi and what's revealed to the mind. All right, going on.
So by next verse, I mean the third in the series still.
Oh, okay.
Haven't finished the series of four. I'm sorry, I miscommunicated. Which having obtained, he thinks there is no other gain superior to it.
Yes. So the idea here is this direct experience of the bliss of the self overcomes any other thing in the world. I like to talk about the economy of the pleasure of the world. It's 95 cents worth of work for a nickel's worth of pleasure. It's just bad economy. Whereas when you can taste the bliss of yourself. In the Hebrew scriptures, there's a very famous psalm. It's number 34. And one of the phrases is, taste and see the goodness of the Lord. Now, if you have not yet experienced that kind of juice in your meditation, keep on keeping on. And all you have to do is taste it once. And then the ruthless rule of the mind comes to your aid. What's the ruthless rule of the mind? The mind will return to the experience that's given it the greatest joy. If it's hot sex, that's where your mind's going to go. If it's smoking crystal meth, that's where your mind's going to go. Thank God. God is the best. God is the most beloved. Sometimes we get our first glimpse of that bliss with the teacher. But then what happens is your mind says, oh, I want to get back there. I want that. And then that's the subhecha, the auspicious desire that drives our spiritual practice. It's not yet the Lord. It's the Lord's glories. But that's what pulls us out of the world. Next idea.
Wherein established, he is not moved even by heavy sorrow.
Yes. So it doesn't mean that you get the green lights of life. Yogis get sick. Yogis' parents die. Yogis lose their jobs. Yogis go bankrupt. Yogis have disabilities, just like anybody else. But it doesn't afflict the yogi because her happiness is not invested in the world. And even a little bit of this detachment frees us from this enormous reaction to what other people think are calamitous events. You have to go there to find that out. Probably the best example I can give as a mature adult. Have you known a young teenager who's fallen in love and it broke up and it's their first heartbreak? And they're convinced they cannot go on. But if you've had some experience with relationship, maybe had more than one, you can understand the pain, but you know that the child will recover. It's not the end of the world. That we're capable of loving again. There's some detachment in us when we have some experience that the young teenager doesn't have yet. I have all sorts of examples. All right, next idea.
Let it be known, the severance from the union with pain is yoga.
So we have talked about yoga can be defined as when the mind is yoked to the self. But another way to define it is we've severed the mind's union with suffering. Why do I suffer? Why am I restless, irritable, discontent? The cause of it is craving, kama, Krishna, thirsting, longing, spriha, wanting, pancha, has so many names. So when that's severed, my mind no longer extroverts. That's yoga. Best articulation of this are the Four Noble Truths of the Buddha. Noble truth number one, life the way most of us live it is dukkha, suffering. The cause of my suffering is kama, craving, attachment. Freedom from craving is freedom from suffering. He said the way to be permanently free is the Eightfold Path. We would say sadhana, the Advaita Vedanta. It's the way to be permanently free from suffering. We sever our union with suffering. I think that's the end of the 4 verses, isn't it?
There's one more clause or sentence.
Okay, go ahead.
This yoga should be practiced with determination and with the mind steady and undespairing.
Yes. So we may get discouraged. We may think we're doing really well, and then something happens and we get triggered and identified. Don't despair. And it says this yoga should be practiced. It's not like a light switch. You flip it on and you're enlightened. No, we have to work at it. We have to be willing to do the manual labor. It's not about reading a bunch of scriptures and trying to figure them out. In the end, the work that needs to be done is viveka, discrimination between the real and the unreal, the self and the not self, and vairagya, letting it all go, giving up my attachments to anything experienced through the senses, and giving up my identification with any form of self. That's the work. That's the practice. So we need to do it. We need to meditate, endeavoring to quieten the mind, inquire into my essential nature. Koham, who am I? Till I directly experience it. Fabulous 4 verses. Fabulous 4 verses. Any thoughts on this? All right, next one.
So it's 2 verses again together.
All right.
So I'll read back to back. Sankalpa prabhavan kama am styaktva sarvan sheshatah manasi vendriyagramam viniyamya samantatah shane. Sorry, I'm not presenting. 1 second. Shane shane ruparameda buddhya dhrutigrihityaya atma samstham manah kritva na kinchadapi chintayet. Abandoning without reserve all desires born of sankalpa, and completely restraining the whole group of senses by the mind from all sides. Little by little, let him attain quietude by his intellect, held firm, having made the mind established in the self. Let him not think of anything.
So this is what we are to do in our meditation seat. Now, this word sankalpa is almost untranslatable. It means wish, it means will, it means intention, it means thought. Here, what we want to understand is the flavor of sankalpa is when I want something. It means imagination is another definition of sankalpa. So we're dealing with our yoga above the neck and below the neck, above the neck and our head. Reduce the frequency and the volume of thought. Below the neck, right here, we're letting go of the struggler. What do I mean by the struggler? So have you ever been in traffic and you've got an appointment and traffic is backed up? Hang on, let's wait till these cars pass. There it is. They are restless tonight. So there you are in traffic and you're late for a meeting or an appointment and you sit there and with your heart you think, why doesn't it go faster? I'm gonna be late. Has anybody ever had that feeling? And then at some point you just resign. You say, I'll get there when I get there. And you go, and you let it go. That's giving up this struggler. That's giving up this sankalpa here. So this is abandoning all this longing, trying to get someplace. And again, doing our best to quieten the mind. Frequently again, the place where we'll have this moment of absolute silence might be between the incoming and the outgoing breath, or between the outgoing and the incoming. Endeavoring to quieten the mind. Things that I have found useful. I cannot think a real thought. Drop them all. Thought arises, just drop it. Just keep dropping. Keep dropping. Till the mind gets into this very crystalline, filled with energy, but silent place. Endeavoring to notice who knows it all. This is how we are to meditate. Now, as I've said many times, the yogi needs to have a bag of tricks. There's not one meditative practice that's efficacious all the time. Here is the principle. The grosser the mind, the more meditative supports we need. What do I mean by a grosser mind? When there's more thought, the frequency and the volume of thought is a lot. Or in the heart, when I'm upset, chant the name of the Lord. Maybe do walking meditation. Maybe do kirtan. Maybe all you can do is go for a walk. But as the mind becomes quieter, the meditative support becomes subtler. You might take up japa, the silent repetition of a mantra. But then as your mind gets quiet, by all means, drop the mantra. You can just abide in silence. That's marvelous. Any thoughts on this?
It's just very helpful and gives me a lot of hope. Thank you.
But Susili, you're a great example. There's times when your mind has been incredibly quiet and very tuned up. And then other times you're a total basket case. Am I wrong?
No, I try to think I'm flunking Vedanta, but I'm still
You can't flunk it. The rosebud is not a failure as a bloom.
Can you say that again?
The rosebud is not a failure as a bloom. Is the rosebud failing flowering?
Oh,
No. It's, and which is more beautiful, the first rose of the summer or the last?
oh,
They all bloom in their own time. And you cannot take a rosebud and pull the petals out. All you do is destroy it. So never, ever do violence to your own mind. You are in a process. In the end, Susili, you're going to see that there's no one there doing the yoga. It's being done.
thank you, Jim.
But the only thing I brought this up is, as we've worked together, your mind has gone through the most exalted states, and sometimes it's funky. And so what do? You got to find the meditation that works for where your mind is.
Yeah, that's very helpful. And in fact, I signed up for a silent meditation retreat from Monday to Friday. So hopefully.
See how you do.
Yeah. Just to have some silence and detachment physically, maybe that will help.
And the fact, I think the greatest thing we can do is make time for God. Most of us are just too busy. I was talking with a young man the other day and saying, how's your meditation coming? Are you doing it? He says, well, I really don't have time. No blame. But nothing's going to happen if you don't take the time. So for you to set aside, how long is it? 10 days, you said?
No, just 5 days.
But still, that's enormous commitment. Is it going to be online or are you going to do it in person?
No, it's online.
All right. All right. Next verse, please. Or next idea. Did we finish all the ideas in this? I got distracted.
No.
Okay, what's the next idea?
Abandoning without reserve all desires born of sankalpa and completely restraining the whole group of senses by the mind from all sides.
Yes. So again, we are able to control a grosser part of our equipment from the subtler part. We control the senses by the mind. We control the mind by the intellect. We control the intellect by living in what we call sakshibhava, taking on the viewpoint of the uninvolved, unattached witness. Let him go. Give no reality to your thoughts. Next idea.
Little by little, let him attain quietude by his intellect, held firm.
So, with the intellect held firm, endeavoring to focus the attention on the subject itself. Who am I? Gohan. And if you need a point of attention, be it the breath or a mantra, it's fine. Just to get the mind concentrated. And I love it that he says, little by little. Takes time. Takes practice. Is that all of those verses?
There's one more line.
Okay.
Having made the mind established in the self, let him not think of anything.
Yes. So let me nuance this. In a 20 or 30-minute meditation period, if you could have moments of real quiescence, you're doing very well. Mind may stop for just a moment. Then the thoughting starts up. No problem. Go back to this intense concentration. Just keep at it. Just keep at it. All right, next verse.
Sorry.
Deepa?
Just
Okay.
bringing it up, sorry. Yato yato nishcharati manaschanchala masthiram tatas tato niyamyeta datapmanyeva vasham nayet. From whatever causes the restless and the unsteady mind wanders away. Sorry. From whatever cause the restless and the unsteady mind wanders away. From that, let him restrain it and bring it back under the control of the self alone.
And yata again and again. You keep doing it. So we want to have all the thoughts, sensations, perceptions weigh the same, what we call samadrishta. A virtuous thought, a vicious thought, a vulgar feeling, a sublime feeling. Whatever they are, continue to bring the mind back. Swamiji used to say, don't get involved with the theme of your thinking. Thought arises, and what we do is we follow the story. The next thing you know, you're off to the races thinking about this, that, and the other thing. And if that happens, no blame. When you notice it, drop it, bring your mind back. Eventually, you'll get to the point with whatever thought arises, you just drop it. Bring the mind back to this intense concentration, this intense attention. Keep having to do this over and over. Now, by thoughts, we also mean like images. Some people go through a period where they start to see stuff in meditation. Oh, Lord Krishna appeared to me. Tell them to get lost. Oh, Jesus came. Tell them to take a hike. Or they think that meditation is about getting messages. Oh, I got a message from my higher power. That's nonsense. Drop it. This is not a problem-solving session. You can do that, but that's not the kind of meditation we're talking about. Whenever objective phenomena arises, drop it. Any thoughts on this?
Yeah, Jim, this is Marcos. I guess I have a question on that. What would be the difference between not getting involved with the theme of thinking versus subtle intellect and exploring that, which I believe was a positive thing or something to work for?
By here, we want to see if you can get the insight into what's your essential nature. Now, in the end, you want to drop that too. See if I can demonstrate it. So it's like this hand is the self, this hand is the mind. You're in the waking state. You're in the dream state. You're in the deep sleep state. This is the deepest meditation. The mind is gone. Then when the mind returns, it goes, oh my gosh, there's nobody there. And if you want to be blissful, thin the mind. Thin the mind. Now, I don't know, does that explain it a little better, Mark?
It does. A follow-up question would be to that: would using symbols to explore, like the ego and kind of its destruction, or using that as kind of tools to do that, that would be the theme of thinking, correct?
That would be the meditation we're suggesting here is subtler than that.
Gotcha.
Using symbols like the Enneagram or astrology or stuff like that, if you wish to go down that road, that's a different process, which may be useful. But that's not meditation.
Right. Cool. Thank you.
Excellent question. Excellent question. And you may get insights into your ego. Like you may find that you're annoyed at a lot of stuff. And if you just sit with the annoyance, you may find underneath that, oh, I'm really afraid. Isn't that interesting? I am of the opinion that the chief activator of most of our doshas, our defects of character, is self-centered fear. I'm afraid I'm not going to get what I want. I'm afraid that I'm going to lose what I have. I'm afraid that people are going to think I'm not okay. I'm afraid I'm not X, Y, or Z. Fear. Is that helpful?
Very much so. Thank you.
Okay, we'll stop here. What verse are we on, Deepaji?
We stopped at 26. We'll start with 27 next week.
All right. We have time for a few more questions.
Hey, Jim, this is Katie. I've got a brief question.
Sure.
Let's say you are, I love the term reveling in the self, the phrase. If you are reveling in the self in deep meditation, and you're over here, and I'm over there doing the same, are we reveling in a shared self, or is each of us reveling in our unique selves?
Excellent. The self in me is not like the self in you. The self in me is the self in you. But our equipment is, of course, different. Let's see if I can give you an example. So if I have a piece of butcher paper facing the iPad, and I turn all the lights down, and there are 6 pinholes in it, and you see 6 lights. The question is, are there 6 pen lights, a light behind each hole, or is there one flashlight shining through those 6 holes?
Oh, that's nice.
So let's imagine that each one of these pinholes have the capacity for self-inquiry. So the pinhole here goes, oh, look at me, my essential nature is a flashlight. Then it talks to the one next to it. Is your essential nature a flashlight? And this goes, yes, my essential nature is a flashlight too. Is my flashlight like your flashlight? No, there's only one light. Each person, when you look behind your eyes, you are seeing, listen carefully, the totality of God, not a part of God. What makes it so weird is you see God has no dimension. Sometimes the self feels like a point. Sometimes it feels like a vast empty space, an ocean. But what differs is these various little intellects through which consciousness shines.
Thank you, Jim. That's super, super helpful.
Another metaphor, imagine the mountain. So around the base of the mountain, there's all sorts of various paths upward. And everybody says, I'm heading towards the temple of truth. No, I'm heading towards the temple of truth. I'm a Buddhist. No, I'm a Sufi. No, I'm a Christian. I'm a Vedantin. They all think they're doing it differently. But as you get to the top of the mountain, the place that everyone arrives at is the same. I. Or we can invert it, a cone. So here's a Katie, here's a Deepa, here's a Mark, here's a Jim. We're going to go to the center of our being. And we all come down to the same point. So the self in me is not like the self in you. The self in me is the self in you. There's only one of us here.
That's super clarifying. Thank you.
There's a very famous Upanishad called the Kaivalya Upanishad. Kaivalya or Kevala means alone. The surface meaning is, oh, you need to go away by yourself and be solitary. That's not its deepest meaning. It means there's only one soul entity. In it is the dream of this world. Very good question. Very good question. All right. Save your questions and we'll answer more next week.